An inmate at Smith State Prison in southeast Georgia shot and killed a 24-year-old female food service worker early Sunday morning. The incident occurred around 4:30 a.m. in the prison's kitchen, before the inmate turned the gun on himself. The victim, Aureon Shavea Grace, was an employee of the food service company Aramark. The Georgia Department of Corrections is investigating the incident. The weapon is in GDC custody at this time, and a complete and thorough investigation of what led up to this tragic incident will be carried out, said the department. The inmate, Jaydrekus Hart, was serving a 20-year sentence for voluntary manslaughter with a maximum release date of June 2043. It remains unclear how Hart obtained the weapon used in the shooting. Aramark spokesperson Debbie Albert expressed heartbreak over the loss, stating, "Our hearts and prayers go out to her family." Friends and family described Grace as kind and pure-hearted, with a beautiful smile. One colleague wrote, "Praying for your family and your babies. You are truly going to be missed."
The metal gates slammed shut behind her. Another morning shift in one of Georgia's most dangerous prisons. Inside the Smith State kitchen, pots clattered, steam rose, and staff prepared for the day. Then gunfire. One shot. One scream. Then silence. Within seconds, a 24-year-old mother of two lay on the floor, fatally wounded. And the man who pulled the trigger? An inmate with a violent past, one who should have never had access to a gun, especially not in a maximum security facility. What happened inside that kitchen stunned the prison system, shattered a family, and raised terrifying questions. How did a convicted killer get a firearm inside prison walls? And why did he turn it on the woman he once claimed to love? Before we get into this deeply disturbing case, welcome to Dark Trace Crime Stories. If you're new here, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more true crime cases that matter. And let me know in the comments, what's your take on romantic relationships between prison staff and inmates? Let's talk about it in the comments. Aureon Shavea Grace, sometimes referred to as Aureon Grace, was more than just a name in the headlines. She was a daughter, a sister, and a mother to two young children who depended on her. At just 24 years old, Orion had already embraced responsibilities that would weigh heavily on anyone twice her age. As a single mom, she poured her energy into building a future for her kids, no matter how hard the road got. In January 2024, she took a job working in the kitchen at Smith State Prison, a maximum security facility in the rural southeast of Georgia. The position came through Aramark, a food service company contracted to provide meals inside the prison. For many living in small, economically strained towns, opportunities like this were among the few steady options available. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't easy. But it was honest work, and Orion took pride in doing it well. Her mother, Honda Hagens, described her as loving, determined, and selfless. She worked tirelessly, not just to provide, but to protect and uplift her family. To those who knew her best, she was a bright light, someone who found strength in her struggles and love in her responsibilities. Orion showed up every day, not for recognition, but for her children. And then, one morning, she didn't come home. Her death wasn't just a tragedy. It was a devastating blow to everyone who loved her. For Honda, the grief came with questions that wouldn't go away. Why wasn't her daughter protected? Why was it even possible for this to happen? As those questions lingered, so did the image of a young mother taken far too soon, while simply doing her job. Smith State Prison in southeast Georgia is a maximum security facility, but inside, the control is fragile at best. The prison has long carried a reputation for being dangerous. In 2023, that reputation turned deadly when a correctional officer was killed by an inmate using a makeshift weapon. It wasn't the first sign of trouble, but it was one that could no longer be ignored. Staff at Smith have voiced concerns for years. Many say they feel unsafe and outnumbered. In critical areas like the prison kitchen, it's not uncommon for employees to work with little to no supervision, directly alongside inmates, serving long sentences for violent crimes. The environment fosters fear and frustration. Earlier in 2023, a major contraband operation was exposed, leading to the arrest of the prison's warden. Despite the scandal, little seems to have changed. Staff remain vulnerable. Inmates continue to gain access to banned items, and security gaps still exist. The kitchen, where civilian workers like Aureon Grace reported daily, was one of the riskiest places in the facility. With limited staffing and inconsistent oversight, it became a blind spot where danger could strike without warning. Orion wasn't just failed by one individual. She was failed by a system that had already shown its cracks. Jaydrekus Hart was 34 years old and serving a 20-year sentence for voluntary manslaughter stemming from a 2013 fatal shooting. He wasn't due for release until 2043. By the time Aureon Grace began working at Smith State Prison in early 2024, Hart had already spent more than a decade behind bars. Somewhere between food prep and routine assignments, a relationship began to take shape between the two. Officials later acknowledged it, but offered few details. Whether it started as casual conversation or subtle emotional exchange, what's clear is that boundaries were crossed. These kinds of relationships inside prisons are more than just frowned upon. They're dangerous. Power dynamics are murky. Emotional manipulation can run deep. For inmates, forming attachments to staff can be strategic. For staff, especially young or emotionally vulnerable ones, the line between connection and compromise can blur quickly. Orion was 24, a hard-working single mother trying to make ends meet. Hart was older, incarcerated, and experienced in the prison system. What drew them together? Was it affection? A search for emotional escape? Or something darker? We may never know how far the relationship went, or how much control Hart had over Orion emotionally. But one thing is certain. In a place like Smith State, personal relationships between inmates and staff don't just raise eyebrows, they raise red flags. Whatever existed between them, it ultimately ended in a moment of irreversible violence. A gun appeared where no gun should have been. A line was crossed that no one could walk back. If you're still watching, hit that like button. It helps us share Orion's story with more people. And if you've seen relationships like this turn dangerous, let us know in the comments. It started like any other day. Aureon Grace arrived at Smith State Prison in the early morning hours. Just like every shift since January, she entered the prison kitchen ready to begin her duties. It was a routine she knew well: report in, prep meals, keep moving. But nothing about this morning would end routinely. Somewhere in that facility, Jaydrekus Hart, an inmate not scheduled for release for another 19 years, was armed with a firearm. To this day, how he obtained it remains a question investigators haven't fully answered. What's known is chilling enough. Hart managed to enter the kitchen, a supposedly secure part of the prison, with a loaded weapon. No one expected what happened next. Inside the kitchen, Hart pulled the gun and fired at Orion. The sound of the gunshot echoed through the concrete halls of Smith State Prison. Panic followed. Staff scrambled. Inmates were rushed out. The quiet hum of morning prep gave way to a scene of confusion, terror, and irreversible damage. Orion was shot at close range. The bullet struck her in the head. As emergency personnel rushed to respond, Hart turned the gun on himself. He was still alive when first responders reached him and was quickly transported to the hospital. But despite the effort, he didn't survive. Orion's injuries were fatal. She died on sight. There was no chance to save her. The exact minute-by-minute sequence of events that morning remains partially sealed within ongoing investigations. But the broad strokes are now tragically clear. A civilian worker entered a prison kitchen and never made it out alive. The man who claimed to care for her became her killer. The shock reverberated not only through Smith State Prison, but across Georgia's correctional system. Staff members asked the same question her mother would later demand answers to. How could this have happened? A gun inside a maximum security prison. A fatal shooting in what was supposed to be a monitored area. 2 lives lost in minutes. And a system left scrambling to explain what went wrong. In the aftermath of the shooting, questions flooded in faster than answers. One of the most chilling discoveries was a suicide note, believed to have been written by Jaydrekus Hart. Its contents have not been publicly released, but authorities confirmed its existence. It offered no closure, only more questions. No explanation could ever justify what happened that morning, especially to Orion's grieving family. But the biggest mystery still hangs in the air. How did an inmate get his hands on a gun inside a maximum security prison? To this day, officials with the Georgia Department of Corrections have not disclosed how the firearm entered Smith State Prison. Investigators confirmed the weapon is in custody, but details about its origin remain under wraps. Speculation has filled that void. Some believe the weapon may have been smuggled in via drone, a method increasingly used in prison contraband delivery. Others point fingers at staff members, suggesting possible inside help. Then there's the simple, haunting explanation. Massive security failures and unchecked access points that allowed a deadly oversight. This isn't just wild guessing. Smith State Prison already had a troubled history. Just 1 year before Orion's death, in early 2023, the prison's warden was fired after a major investigation revealed a contraband smuggling ring operating within the facility. Arrests were made and leadership changes were promised. But clearly, whatever reforms were put in place either weren't enough or weren't enforced. The environment inside the prison was described by some staff members as chaotic and dangerous. Understaffing, lack of proper oversight, and unchecked inmate movement created daily safety concerns. Vulnerable areas, like kitchens, were often left with minimal supervision, something that should never happen in a high-risk facility. For Orion's family, especially her mother, Honda Higgins, the lack of transparency only deepened the pain. She publicly demanded answers, questioning how Hart was allowed access to her daughter, why he wasn't searched properly, and how a deadly weapon got past multiple levels of supposed security. Her grief turned to outrage. And she's not alone. Correctional officers, former inmates, advocacy groups, all have weighed in demanding accountability. How can a facility that already experienced the fatal stabbing of a correctional officer just months earlier still allow for such catastrophic failure? What happened on June 16th wasn't an isolated act of violence. It was the result of a system that was already showing cracks. And this time, those cracks cost a 24-year-old mother her life.
The system failed her beloved daughter.
There is no way there should have been a handgun, an inmate with a handgun. And they're seeing all these things about my daughter. Do they even know? Y'all, nobody knows the real story because she's not here to tell it.
A mother grieving for her child, Honda Higgins, found out her daughter, Aureon Grace, was dead through social media. Inmates at Smith State Prison messaging Grace's sister, saying her last words were, quote, "But I have children."
I just started screaming and panicking, and I didn't wait for nobody else to call because I just wanted to go and put eyes on my child. So we went to the prison.
In a statement, the GDC confirms this, saying the family was on scene for 7 hours. Higgins describes her daughter as a caring, hardworking young woman, someone who will go out of her way to show kindness to anyone. But her mother worried for her kind heart.
And I used to always tell her, you can't let everybody get close to you because when they see that you have a kind heart and you will help anybody, they'll take advantage of that.
She says her daughter made a, quote, "bad decision by being nice to an inmate, but that should not have come with a death sentence."
Regardless of anything, she was a mother. She loved her kids. She was a daughter. She was a sister. Like, she has family. She had a heart. She wasn't a bad person. Who hasn't made bad decisions and stuff? That don't mean you deserve to die.
They let my daughter die. That was the anguished cry of Deshonda Hagens, Aureon Grace's mother, a woman forced to bury her 24-year-old daughter after she was killed in the place she went to work every day to support her children. In her grief, Deshonda did not hold back. She openly criticized the Georgia Department of Corrections for what she called a complete failure to protect civilian workers like Orion. She demanded answers to questions no family should ever have to ask. Why wasn't her daughter safe? How did an inmate get a gun? Why was there no officer present in the kitchen? Her outrage was not just about the crime. It was about the system that allowed it to happen. To her, the prison failed at every level. Security checks were supposed to prevent inmates from entering certain areas unsupervised. Weapons were never supposed to be inside. But somehow, every layer meant to protect her daughter had failed, and the cost was unbearable. Deshonda described her daughter as more than just a hard-working mom. She was a light in her family, a devoted mother of 2 young children, a woman who took on a difficult job because she believed it would help her build a better life for her family. That trust in the system, in the job, in the people around her, was shattered. In the days following the shooting, Deshonda didn't retreat into private mourning. She stepped forward, using her voice to call for accountability and reform. She insisted that no other family should have to suffer the way hers did. Her daughter wasn't just a statistic. She was someone's child, someone's mother, someone who mattered. Her grief turned into advocacy. She demanded immediate answers from prison officials, public transparency about how the shooting happened, and changes to how civilian staff are protected inside correctional facilities. For Deshonda, this wasn't just about justice for Orion. It was about making sure no one else would walk the same path of pain. And for everyone watching from the outside, it became impossible to ignore what her family had lost. This wasn't just about a prison failure. It was a family destroyed. After Aureon Grace's death, more cracks in the foundation began to show. Inside Smith State Prison, staff members, speaking under the condition of anonymity, described an environment steeped in fear, fatigue, and neglect. Many had been warning for months, even years, that it was only a matter of time before something like this happened. For them, this wasn't a shocking tragedy. It was a predictable consequence of a system falling apart. They spoke of a prison where employees are regularly outnumbered, overworked, and often forced to manage high-risk areas alone. Kitchens, for example, were known to be particularly vulnerable. Civilian workers, like Orion, were frequently stationed there, without correctional officers nearby. It wasn't just unsafe, it was unacceptable. Some described a culture where the line between authority and disorder had all but vanished. In certain areas of the prison, staff felt inmates were the ones in control. Officers and employees often operated with the hope, not the assurance, that they'd get through their shift without incident. And when problems were reported, nothing changed. Repeated warnings about unsafe practices, unchecked inmate movement, and contraband trafficking were allegedly ignored or brushed aside. Employees felt disposable, tools to be used rather than lives to be protected. Morale was low, trust in leadership even lower. This wasn't the first time Smith State Prison had faced public scrutiny. In October 2023, a correctional officer was killed by an inmate armed with a homemade weapon. Earlier that same year, a state investigation exposed a smuggling operation within the prison, leading to the warden's arrest and termination. Despite those alarming events, insiders claim no meaningful overhaul ever took place. Instead, problems were buried under bureaucracy until another life was lost. Now, the calls for reform are growing louder. Correctional experts and employee advocates are urging the state to take immediate action. Better training, stronger staffing levels, more oversight in sensitive areas, and tighter control over inmate interactions with civilian workers. There are also demands for stronger mental and emotional support systems for prison staff constantly operating in high-stress conditions. But behind all these technical solutions lies a deeper issue: accountability. If a maximum security facility can't prevent a fatal shooting inside its own kitchen, how secure is it really? And how many more warnings must go ignored before another tragedy strikes? For many working inside Smith State Prison, the answer is clear. The system is broken, and it's breaking people. Aureon Grace walked into Smith State Prison each day not as a correctional officer, but as a food service worker, a civilian contractor doing her best to provide for her children. She didn't carry a badge. She didn't wear body armor. What she brought with her was a sense of duty and a desire to build a stable life for her family. But her job placed her inside one of Georgia's most dangerous correctional facilities. And in that environment, the boundaries between inmate and employee, between safety and danger, became dangerously blurred. Her story reveals something most people don't see. Behind the concrete walls and razor wire, prisons aren't just cages for punishment. They're complex, broken ecosystems where policies fail, where oversight collapses, and where emotional vulnerability can turn deadly. The tragedy of Orion's death wasn't just about one inmate with a gun. It was about everything that allowed that moment to happen. The lax security, the ignored warnings, the absence of supervision in critical areas, the silence surrounding relationships that should have been flagged early on. In correctional institutions, relationships between inmates and staff are more than policy violations. They're risk multipliers. They expose emotional gaps, power imbalances, and blurred allegiances. And when those lines are crossed in a system already cracked by corruption and neglect, the consequences are often fatal. Orion's story also reminds us that safety isn't a privilege, it's a right. And too often, civilian workers in prisons are treated as expendable, left to navigate dangerous environments with little training, minimal protection, and virtually no support. Her death was preventable, but only if someone had cared enough to enforce the rules, tighten the procedures, and recognize that all lives inside those walls matter. This isn't just a story about failure. It's a call for change. To honor Aureon Grace, we must push for reforms that protect every person working behind prison gates, from the kitchen to the cell block. That means real accountability, stronger oversight, and a commitment to treating civilian staff as human beings, not collateral. Her children will grow up without their mother. Her family will never be the same. But if her story leads to change, her loss won't be in vain. If you believe prison workers deserve better protection, share this story. Subscribe for more investigations that hold broken systems accountable. And tell us in the comments, what do you think can be done to prevent the next tragedy? The investigation into the events that led to Aureon Grace's death is still ongoing. Authorities continue to examine how a deadly weapon made its way into a maximum security facility and whether others may have played a role, directly or indirectly. The Georgia Department of Corrections has promised transparency, but many, including Orion's family, are still waiting for answers. As this case unfolds, it's important to remember the real people at the center of these headlines: a mother lost, children left behind, and a family devastated by the very system that was supposed to keep her safe. We invite you to share your thoughts in the comments, but please keep your contributions respectful. Behind this story is a grieving family, and every voice matters. What do you think went wrong here? Was this about love, manipulation, or a system that never stood a chance of protecting her? Drop your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a story that matters. Thank you for watching Dark Trace Crime Stories. If this case moved you, consider subscribing to stay informed about stories that demand answers and justice.